What's up, folks? This is Nicholas Eidolon welcoming you back to the dungeon once again. This is episode 8 of Analog Dungeon, and I'm recording this a little later than I intended to, which is a running theme lately, but this is actually late Sunday night on the week before this needs to air, so apologies to Shane for making him rush on anything here. So I've been brainstorming a little bit lately about, you know, some things I want to do for this show. I was briefly on a live episode of Shane's show of Guild and Craft a few weeks ago, and I talked about probably setting up a Facebook page. So I'll probably be doing that once the final episode of this season airs. We'll be doing 12 episodes, so 4 more after this one, and then we'll stop for this season and run these same 12 episodes over again. So I think during that interim I will set up a Facebook page for notifications and more viewer interaction. Probably for season 2 we'll do a viewer-based episode where you guys sort of decide what tapes you want me to cover. I also have a Halloween episode already planned out for this year, so we'll still be doing the reruns in October, but sometime during the week of Halloween I'd like to run a Halloween special, just because I really like Halloween. That's one of my favorite holidays, and it's really the only holiday that my wife and I celebrate. Our birthdays are just a few days before Halloween, so it's really the only time of year that we do anything special. So I will be taking that week off, but I will have a special episode planned and ready for that week. And I've already got some great horror themed tapes selected for that. So in addition to that, I'm just sort of planning out the next season. I'm gonna maybe try to do something and get some better lighting and probably better audio if I can make that work out, but who knows, we'll see. Everybody seems to enjoy the format and the way the show looks right now, so just some minor improvements I'd like to make, I think, for the second season. But anyway, as far as what we're looking at today, we've got a really nice set of tapes, and a couple of things that are not tapes, in fact. So a little bit of a multimedia episode, which I'm going to try to do more of, because I do want to look at more than just music. We're also going to look at a couple of different genres today. So we've got some dungeon synth, of course, and then we've got a couple of tapes that diverge, not too far away, but just away from the dungeon synth scene a little bit. In the background right now, you should be able to hear the Song of Thra. So this is a Dark Crystal themed compilation tape that was put together by Witherthorn Records out of New Zealand. This has some really fantastic names associated with it. So right off the bat, we've got Dungeon Troll, of course, from Serpent Sword Records, amazing stuff. We've got Arcana Liturgia, who's one of the older names that's still active in the scene. We've got Shrouded Gate. We'll actually be looking at a Shrouded Gate tape today. We've got Spell Leech, which is a Dark Crystal themed project, sort of dungeon noise a little bit. Soulless Woods, Vandalorum, love Vandalorum. We'll be taking a look at some Vandalorum tapes in the next season. I don't know who Molly Ringwraith is. I see this name on compilations every so often. I love that name. It makes me smile every time. What a brilliant name, Molly Ringwraith. Then we've got Heretic. I'm not familiar with that name. I'm not sure who that is. Saragost, of course, friend of the show, Saragost. The Crystal of Unbroken Sleep and Cerulean Salvation, those next two names, not really familiar with. Cond, we'll be taking a look at a tape from that project today. Tarkenturfer. I'm not sure who's behind that project, or it might be escaping me, but I know that they have releases out on Skaven Throne Records. That's a really cool project with really brilliant art most of the time. And then Mausoleum Wanderer finishes this compilation out. Mausoleum Wanderer is another great project that I did not get to in this first season with the way I planned everything out, but next season we'll be taking a look at the Mausoleum Wanderer tape that came out last year. So yeah, that's a Dark Crystal themed compilation from Skaven Throne. Beautiful, beautiful art, really nice compilation. Just solid material all the way around. So that's going to play in the background. And the first tape we're going to look at is Shrouded Gate. So this is an album called Old Paths to the Sleeping Throne. Shrouded Gate is based out of Rhode Island, and it's the main project of community member Jacob Barcombe. He also releases music as Artermort and Polar Keep. I know two releases from those projects have come out pretty recently as well. This is actually the third release from Shrouded Gate, and I believe it's the first physical release to come from this project. And this was put out by Undernest Conjurations. So Undernest is a label owned and operated by Josh and Shane from Somber Arcane. It's actually named after the studio that they kept in the basement of the Raven, which is the venue in Worcester, or whatever that place is that they're from. And that's, you know, the Raven is where the Northeast Dungeon Sieges are typically held if, you know, we weren't stricken by plague like we are right now. But this is one of two initial drops from Undernest that we'll be looking at today, actually. And this one was actually mastered by Shane. So this really beautiful, ornate cover. Let's open this up. So yeah, this really beautiful, ornate cover was drawn by an artist named Yaroslav Gerchadovic. So apologies if I butchered that a little bit. And then this logo was drawn by an artist called Astral Gaze. Really great layout here by Undernest. We've got the track listing there, and on the inside as well. We've got the Undernest logo here, and that's Undernest Conjurations 001. So this is the first official release from Undernest. We've got this really nice black tape that's pro-dubbed, printed with white. And this was released in an edition of 50. And, it was actually packaged with some incense and a really beautiful piece of jewelry. Let me get it here. So this is actually a pendant made of a nail and wire that Jacob made, and I know he has a lot of wearable art and jewelry at a shop on Etsy called Failing Light. His shop is called Failing Light. So I'll link that in chat while we're looking at this. So this is a really cool album. This album opens with this 20 minutes just epic song called The Tale of Shrouded Gate. And this song alone is divided into 6 sections or movements, I suppose. So the first part is called Beacons of the Skylord. It's this ethereal, reverb-laden, atmospheric, just bliss, frankly. It's just some of the most beautiful stuff I've heard in a while. The vocal sounds that he's using here, just kind of get to me. Like there's something otherworldly about it. It's just dark and mesmerizing, and there's just something about that vocal synth that I just love. The intro leads into a section called Company Complete. A little bit of a reprieve from that sort of dark, heavy atmosphere. So this one's a little more meditative. You get a sort of forest vibe from it. Then we come into a middle section. The first part of the middle passages is called Signs of the Signs the Devil Spoke. So things start to go even further south here, though. We get a little bit of a reprieve with Company Complete, and then Signs the Devil Spoke. You get these ominous keys, you get this sort of crunchy, distorted bass, and these huge gothic organ sounds, you know, just like some of the stuff on those Saragosse tracks that I love so much. After that, you get a fourth section called Chosen by the Shadow Path. This changes gears a little bit again. This one's really charged with this deep, bittersweet emotion, this sadness that just sort of bites into you. And there's a short section before we get to part 5 that's called Dalliance with Death. This part is driven by this slow rhythmic percussion and this sort of warbly, distorted lead. That lead sort of rises up like a mountain almost. It's so strong, and it's like you're marching through this subterranean torchlit hell. This is a really oppressive track, frankly. It's foreboding, it's regal, like a dark regality to it. So at that point, we're like 17 minutes into this track, and we get to the final section, which is called The Gate. And here, everything just sort of dies down. There's this stark, plucked string that's reminiscent of a string that we heard back in the intro to this song. And there's just this simple melody that leads us into the remainder of the album. So again, that's leading us into the remainder of the album. So that's just the first track. There's still 5 tracks after that first track. That's mind-blowing to me. I mean, you could put that song on a tape by itself, and I'd buy that in a heartbeat. The rest of the album is just as good. I mean, there's just nothing throwaway here. Everything is just spot on, perfect. I'm really impressed by Jacob's ability to combine, and I've said this about some artists before, you take these sort of disparate styles and you sort of put them together to create this almost soundtrack presence on your albums, but he's still maintaining, the dungeon synth vibe that we are looking for here. It just flows together really well. And again, this is really in that soundtrack realm, but I think he's got enough of that dungeon sensibility that it doesn't feel too out of place. The production is pretty sleek and full, and again, that's coming from Shane, who's obviously a very practiced hand at production. A lot of skill there, and there's just such an emotional element to these songs. There's sort of a profound sense of otherworldly awe and wonder, but there's also a huge ominous vibe to a lot of it. But yeah, that otherworldly sensibility, it's very present in the intro track. It comes up in a lot of places across these. It's those strange vocal sections that stick with me for some reason and give me that vibe. And it just transports me somewhere else. And I use that term a lot, that transportative term. But that's really what it does sometimes. It's just so... that fantasy vibe is so deep that you can get kind of lost in it. So yeah, even if you don't take the time to listen to this whole album, just go listen to that first track, that 20-minute track, because it hits really hard. this is a really, really good album, a huge accomplishment. So that's Shrouded Gate, Old Paths to the Sleeping Throne. This is a huge, huge recommendation from me. Alright, next up, we've got another tape from Undernest, the second of their first 2 drops. This is Phranick's debut solo album. This is called The Pulse Runs Through Us, and the Weave is a Pulse. This beautiful cover art that you're seeing is by an artist called Aaron White. And what's really awesome about this release is that we can see that cover in more detail if we take a look at the cover of the accompanying short story collection that Phranick wrote as a companion piece to this album. So every track on this album has a corresponding piece of writing in this collection, and the collection itself is a really brilliant read. I mean, it's fantastic. The pieces in here range from a full novella to short stories to just short vignettes and poems about certain characters, or about Phranick interacting with certain characters. It's all following Phranick both on his homeworld of Jawurl, which is a constructed world that Shane developed, and elsewhere in the multiverse, it follows him as well. And there's so much heart and love that went into this book. You can tell when you read it, and it's so fun, and it's charming, and it's nostalgic. It has a similar feeling to what I discussed in the last episode when I talked about that Owlbear release. You know, it's not trying to impress anybody. It's not trying to be anything other than a sort of pure indulgence into Phranick's world and character. It's a work of love, and the characters here are full and alive. And, you know, that comes from the huge amount of time that Shane has put into developing these characters and the lore behind them at the D&D table with his friends and by himself with his music. So this book is really cool. I love the size of it because it can basically sit right next to like an ace paperback from the 60s. So it's just got like sort of an old school vibe to it as far as, you know, a piece of fantasy goes. This book is 155 pages. It's got a short intro by Shane. It's got a foreword written by Josh Pratt of Somber Arcane. Really cool stuff. So let's take a look back at the tape now. If we open this up, on the inner part of this J card, let's make sure we're getting that. On the inner part of this J card, we have another really great piece of art. This is a portrait of Phranick. This tape is pro-dubbed on a purple shell. It's got really beautiful white printing on it. That Phranick logo is just really beautiful. I love the look of that logo. I love the font, the illumination of the P in Phranick, really beautiful. And this tape actually has a really awesome extra, just like that Shrouded Gate tape. Let me find it over here and make sure we can see it here. So this is a little vial that this tape came with. It's sealed with some purple wax, and in here we've actually got some sulfur and some bat guano, like real actual bat shit that Josh had to buy, and these are the components to a fireball spell from D&D, so totally relevant to Phranick's wizard character. So that's just completely fucking cool. Like, what an awesome little addition to this package. All right, so let's talk about these tracks and the corresponding written pieces that go along with them. So the opening track here is called Town on the Brink of Eventually. Really beautiful example of Phranick's ability to build songs. Here, the elements just sort of layer one after another until you have this beautiful arrangement of tones and melodies and this really nice percussion at the end. I'm trying to find the exact words to describe the kind of specific fantasy tone that this album gives me, because it is dungeon synth, of course. It has all the right elements, but it eschews a lot of the typical elements that you would sort of harp on in a dungeon synth release, or a lot of maybe the atmosphere that you would try to go for. It really just feels like its own thing. It really feels like someone sitting down, not to record a dungeon synth album, but just to evoke a pure constructed fantasy world, which, you know, really is the point here. And I really think that that's sort of what Somber Arcane does, what Josh does, what Phranick does, what Shane does. You know, I've heard them say before that they were making this music, and then somebody told them that it was dungeon synth. So, you know, they're not approaching it. Neither artist, especially Shane, I think, isn't really approaching this as wanting to make dungeon synth. They're just making this music that comes naturally to the characters and the stories that they're trying to tell. So, let's see. So anyway, yeah, this track is called "Town on the Brink of Eventually." It was actually inspired. The track and the story that's present in the written work was inspired by the cover painting here. So in the book, we see Phranick sort of stranded in this tower, surrounded by this huge lake of eyeball-filled ooze, and sort of looking for a way to get out, to sort of plane hop out of there to another plane of existence. There's a lot of that goes on here. Phranick sort of bouncing around to different planes of existence. Track 2 is called Mindcast. This is a spacey, mysterious piece. This relates the story of Phranick journeying into the mind of a companion who has been sort of stricken down by this nefarious potion that he's ingested. This story was co-written by Shane and his friend Malt Schlitzman. So that's another, I think another player who plays Dungeons and Dragons with Shane. I love the concept for this story. I think this might be my favorite piece in the whole collection. It's really great to see the ideas here that they explore, and the really interesting way that Phranick navigates this other character's mind. That's a cool story and a really great track to go along with it. The centerpiece of this album is called Requiem for an Empty Castle. So that's track number 3. And that story takes up the brunt of the story collection. And it relates a tale where Phranick and Naganog help an old friend defend their kingdom against a wrathful lord. This piece certainly has some old school synth stylings, maybe some Berlin school stylings. Maybe we could call them Taiga-esque amongst ourselves. It's a very progressive piece, so it's about 8 minutes long, and it just has a lot of interesting ideas and elements that develop over that 8 minutes. I'm super fond of the percussion here, this sort of raw drum sound that adds a really unique element, sort of like a garage element to this track. The second half of this one is really heroic and bold, really goes into sort of a traditional high fantasy sound and vibe. That track's followed up by a track called Adrift Between Worlds. That features lyrics and vocals by Fortuna of the very excellent dungeon synth project Mors Serta and the very cool indie rock project Ghost Rider. This is a beautiful track. Plus, Fortuna appears as a character in the previous story, Requiem for an Empty Castle, and she also provides some synths on that song as well. The second side of this tape opens with Wherever the Magic Will Take Us. In the collection, this is a sort of a vignette concerning Phranick and a magical colleague. And it sort of discusses Phranick's tendency to hop between planes of existence. So it explores, that idea of him doing that a little bit. Musically, this is sort of a dark piece, almost ritualistic. It's got some really incredible rhythms, almost tribal percussion that gets paired with some brass sounds. That again, there's a sound there in that brass section that's sort of a firm foothold in that classic dungeon synth realm, but it's just presented a little more uniquely here, I think. The track that follows that, A Hurricane, A Revel, takes up just a small portion of the book. It's a really short poem featured in the book, but on this tape, it's right around 10 minutes long, and it's a beautiful, beautiful piece of dungeon synth made solely with the sounds from a Yamaha CS2X keyboard. This is probably my favorite track on the album. I'm kind of a sucker for that harpsichord sound, and that features prominently here. And then there's just this murky, ethereal, lo-fi soundscape that's going on underneath. Probably the most classic dark ambient vibe you're going to find on this album. I just love this track. And then finally, the album ends with a truly interesting cover. Dress Rehearsal Rag Part 1 is part of a cover of a Leonard Cohen song, and it's performed with the sounds of an omnichord, which is an instrument I actually had to look up. So if you're not familiar with an omnichord, look that up. And it's also performed with a plastic bat and a filing cabinet. So some very interesting sounds got put together to make this cover. So that's just a work of art. That's just pure skill. Go listen to that track, because it's really, really beautiful. And the accompanying story here has Phranick performing this for a distraught king somewhere in the multiverse. Excellent piece of fiction. So as a solo effort, altogether here, this is a wildly successful album in my opinion. It really does exactly what you want it to do as a listener. With Naginah's solo album that we looked at in the very first episode of the show, we got this sort of raw, stripped down, emotional demo. With Phranick's here, we get excellent experimentation. We get a sort of fearless display of a range of content. This hugely ambitious mixed media effort with a novel, a novella that goes along with it. So I really applaud this album wholeheartedly. This is fantastic. So try to get this. I think there might be some copies of the book available still, maybe. I don't know, but I'm sure you can get your hands on it one way or another. This is just a hugely impressive piece of work. So that's Naginah, or Phranick with the A Pulse Runs Through Us, and The Weave is a Pulse. Alright, what do we got next? Next we have a project called Cond. This is an album called The Sage of Witherthorn. This is another band, another project based out of Worcestershire, whatever that place is called up there, Worcestershire. Just like Phranick and Undernest recordings. In fact, this is a close friend of both Josh and Shane, and apparently a lot of the songs in this artist's catalog, maybe all of them actually, are based on events from tabletop campaigns that they all experienced together. The person behind this project is also half of the mighty Ticklebelly, which is an improv project that Shane is also a part of. And this tape was released by Rotten Shape, which is a label as well as a tabletop and board game publisher. I believe they do some comics as well. They put out the Abandoned Places cassette discography, which is one of my favorite pieces in my collection. And they also released a compilation of the 2 conned demos that preceded this album. So as far as presentation goes, we have a fantastic full-color J-card with a piece of art from a French painter called Sieskia. There's a black and white detail here on the inside, along with some text indicating that some of the tracks and listing the songs that were recorded between 2013 and 2019. And then we have this really nice white tape with blueprinting. So this is a 13-track album of incredibly robust fantasy ambient dungeon synth, almost veering into a more electronic sound than a typical album you might find in the dungeon synth tag. It opens with some sounds that are almost akin to synthwave, and it has this very bold percussion, but then it sort of gets pulled back into the medieval realm with some of the strings in the opening of track 2. So you get a sort of good mix right off the bat of the sort of tones that this artist is going for. But then, you know, even with that sort of back to basics sound on that second track, that track grows, just like all of these do, into this grand multi-layered masterpiece. A lot of layers going on here, a lot of building in the way these tracks are laid out. So this music really just takes that fantasy vibe and it just ratchets it up into a very modern presentation to my ear. There's something epic and high adventure about it. And of course, you get that with a lot of dungeon synth and fantasy synth works, but there's something in that modern presentation here that really sets it apart for me. I think that where other projects might go for a more realistic approach to their sounds, you know, something more orchestrated, or maybe lean heavily into a video game sound, this one sort of goes in a different direction. It allows the electronic elements to sort of flourish and drive the sound, but it has a lot of the sort of traditional elements present as well in their natural form. You take a track like the Siege of Bancroft, for instance, the Siege of Bancroft Tower, where that bass sound sort of carries a little bit of a burned edge, and then the drum programming becomes a little industrial, almost in a dance music kind of way. And by the end, you know, those drums, they pick up speed, and we get something like a synth guitar tone that comes in. Like this track actually just gets really metal at the end, basically, but not black metal. It's more like a big symphonic metal sound. And a lot of the tracks here build that way. They start with these basic elements, and they grow and morph them into these pounding, energetic songs that just sort of hit you in the chest. Some moments that I really adore here are around 2 minutes into the track number 8, called Legacies Etched in Ice. You get this super nice crystalline sort of harpsichord outro, incredibly powerful, and then there's this sort of neoclassical flute sound on the track Gnome's Workshop, which also features a lot of cool sound effects. You get like tools clanking and this tinkering going on in the background. A lot of really nice immersiveness there. And the last track on this album, Monuments of a Bygone Era, has this sort of electric synthy haze that really seals off the album in a really satisfying way. And all throughout, the strength of the songwriting and the sledgehammer drum choices that are made, there's this tight production. It's just killer front to back. This tape is actually still in stock at Rotten Shape. That's sort of insane to me. Like, this is really good stuff. So I'll drop a link to Rotten Shape in the chat. I would really recommend going and picking this up. Or if you're into CDs, Ancient Meadow has that covered. They've got some CDs of this available. Another exciting note is that the Bandcamp page for this release says that there might be some literary work from this artist in the future. So that would be really cool. Hopefully in the future we can showcase that, just like we showcased Phranick's written work in this episode. So look out for that, and go pick up The Sage of Witherthorn from Cond. All right, let's have some tea and then move on to our next tape. All right, so this next tape, we're going to look at something sort of totally different. So we're going to veer out of the realm of dungeon synth for just a little bit. And this is a project out of Oklahoma City. And this is called Chat Pile. This tape is a compilation of the 2 demos that Chat Pile put out last year in 2019. This is a sort of sludgy, hardcore noise rock project. And these 2 demos are some of my favorite releases from 2019. When I found this, I was just really blown away. And unfortunately, I didn't find it in time to snag original pressings of either demo. If I'm not mistaken, I think I saw this originally off on Adam from Vinyl Vlogs Facebook page. I mentioned him in an earlier episode of Analog Dungeon, but he runs Vinyl Vlog, which is a YouTube channel where he just uploads daily reviews of heavy metal, extreme metal releases. But yeah, he had posted this a link to this Bandcamp, so I immediately checked it out because everything he recommends is fantastic. This was something really different even for him. Usually he's in the realm of death metal and black metal, but you know, obviously this stood out to him just like it stood out to me. But yeah, unfortunately both of those original demos had disappeared, but I was able to grab this compilation tape that came out before it was gone. I know Andrew from Dungeons Deep Records is a big fan of this project. We were both able to grab the vinyl version of this compilation that came out from Reptilian Records. Really stoked when that got announced as well. So this is a really, really cool project. The name Chat Pile comes from the word chat, which is the word for the poisonous waste of the lead and zinc mining that took place in the United States in the early 20th century. So apparently, when you mine zinc and lead, you leave behind these huge piles of silica and limestone and dolomite, which is referred to as chat. So you just have these big poisonous piles of refuse that dot the landscape in certain parts of the country, including the band's home state of Oklahoma. And that name's sort of very figuratively poignant when we look at the content of some of these songs. First of all, though, let's look at this packaging. So on the cover, we've got this photo that's like a residential home. Looks like it has Halloween decorations on it. it's sort of hard to place what time period this might have been taken. I really like the uniform style here because the individual demo releases had very similar covers. Their logo here is almost a generic like death metal, black metal style logo, which is really interesting because the music is totally unique. Like it doesn't really fit into any category comfortably. We've got the titles of the 2 demos here at the bottom. That's This Dungeon Earth and Remove Your Skin Please. And on the inside, we have a portrait of the band. And we've got their names underneath. So that's obviously some monikers here. Raygun Bush on vocals, Luther Manhole on guitar, Sten on bass, and Captain Ron on the Yamaha DT Explorer. And then we've got a really nice translucent pink tape, and the vinyl that I picked up of this was also pink. So that's a really aesthetically beautiful tape in my opinion. Let's see, this is 2 demos, like I said. So we've got demo 1 on This Dungeon Earth on the first side, and Remove Your Skin Please on the second side there. Musically speaking, this is a really noisy, discordant, off-kilter kind of release. It's a mix of like sludgy production and this sort of hardcore sensibility. There's a huge drum sound here, really dismal guitars, really mean, angular riffing. What really puts this over the top for me, though, is the vocals and the lyrics. I'm really, I guess, a lyric-oriented person outside of ambient music. And, you know, maybe that's because I write and I can just sort of relate to putting words together more than I can relate to putting music together. And as a fan of horror literature and a fan of lyricists like Dax Riggs from Acid Bath and J.R. Hayes from Pig Destroyer, the lyrics here are completely genius to me. There's just this dark, vile, deranged stuff. It's not really the blood and gore, that cathartic, sometimes humorous stuff you get with like a death metal release. There's very real horror going on here. This is like dregs of society, people that want to hurt you kind of material. There's material here dealing with child murder and mental trauma and serial killer ideology. My favorite track on the first demo is called Crawl Space. It's the last track, and that's sort of a profile of a police officer who clearly has these dark tendencies and these upsetting thoughts and wants to hurt people. And upsetting is a good word. It's upsetting to listen to. So like full-on trigger warning for some stuff on this album. It deals with child abuse and animal abuse. Like my favorite track on the second side, on the second demo, the first song, Dallas Beltway, it deals hugely with child murder and child abuse. And Dallas Beltway is probably the best song on this whole compilation. On that one, you get like this opening percussion with this just menacing fucking riff that drives the whole song. Just really dark stuff. And again, the highlight here is the vocal delivery. The vocals are just unhinged, deranged, slurred, unsettling, confrontational. The performance really here, the attention to detail to make these vocals so threatening is just a work of art. You know, this guy's like screeching and mumbling and yelling belligerently and almost sobbing in some of the same tracks. Like it's this huge fucked up emotional range that's really incredible to hear from a vocalist. Go listen to this, because there's some really cool stuff on here. Like it ranges from like I said, this sort of menacing, dark, angular, sludgy stuff, to a song like Mask, which is the second song on side B, which has some almost goth rock or new wave sounds to it. Some of the tracks on the original have a much more traditional hardcore sound. If you like dark music, if you like heavy music, there's something you're gonna like here. This is a really, really cool band. And again, this is just their first 2 demos. I cannot wait for a full length from these guys. This is fantastic stuff. So that's Chat Pile out of Oklahoma with This Dungeon Earth and Remove Your Skin Please. All right, moving right along, we're gonna look at some black metal. This is an album called A Spectral Descent. And this is from a one-man project called Despondent Moon. This is a project based out of the UK, and behind the helm here we have Sean Hancock, who is another community member, who a lot of you probably know as Diork Weg. He's just a hugely prolific dungeon synth artist out of the UK. He performed at the last Dungeon Skirmish. As Despondent Moon, he's released 3 black metal tapes, 2 in 2019, including this one, and 1 in early 2020. So this is the first release, and it came out in May of 2019. Sean makes all of his tapes by hand. If we open this up, take a closer look at the J card. We have this very nice, totally illegible Despondent Moon logo in the upper corner here. I love that logo so much. And then we have this sort of awesome gothic architecture on the cover, in this sort of inverted black and white. The tape itself is really nice because this is a, I hope we're picking up the colors there a little bit, because this is a, just a clear shelled cassette that's hand dubbed. But what Sean does is actually paints the insides of the shells of his releases. So basically he has to disassemble this, paint the inside for this effect, and then, you know, allow it all to dry and reassemble. But you get this really cool splatter effect. And this one is purple with these blue and black splatters. So just a huge amount of work has to go into getting these painted and hand dubbed and everything. So just really cool work from you know, a one-man show there. So this is Despondent Moon's A Spectral Descent. Musically, this opens with this just beautiful gothic synth intro. We know Sean's really proficient with synth work. Excellent atmosphere added by some rain effects and some sort of voices fading out in the background. But then with track 2, this just sort of takes off as a full-on black metal release. You've got this deep, mournful, dark riffing that's going on, this depressive, sinking, dreadful guitar tone. The drums keep a really nice mid-pace for a lot of this album. I really like the drumming. I really like the abrasive, sharp crash sounds from the drums. Track 3 is a real highlight for me. You've got these really atmospheric guitar textures on that track, and then right around the middle through the end, you've got this sort of haunting atmosphere with these really cool drum fills. Track 4 turns up the pacing a little bit. You've got blast beats, some sort of classic swirling hypnotic black metal, maybe a little Emperor vibe going on there. And then track 5, you get a sort of intro on that to track 6. And then track 6 is a 6-minute track. It's the longest one on the album. Track 6 really features some of the best drumming on the whole album. Really complex, interesting drum patterns, to my ear at least. I don't know shit about drumming really, but it sounds fucking cool. Vocally, the delivery here is just spot on. It's sort of layered underneath all the other elements in a really nice way, harsh and screeching and tortured. There's no lyrics available anywhere as far as I know, which is a shame, but you know, I understand that choice, not wanting to put lyrics out there sometimes. Sean's playing is great. I know he's a really good guitarist. I know he's got other projects that are not even related to, you know, the dark ambient or black metal scene. But yeah, like his riffing is really spot on. His production is tight, and it really kind of fits in a good place between polished and atmospheric. So it's not completely raw, but it, you know, just enough. This is just a really excellent one-man project out of the UK. So yeah, definitely, if you haven't had a chance to check out Despondent Moon, or Diorc Weg for that matter, hopefully you've checked out at least one of those. But yeah, this is a really, really cool release. And the other 2 releases are just as good. And again, there's a huge amount of dungeon synth alone that you could hear from his Diorc Weg project. But yeah, that's Despondent Moon's A Spectral Descent. Alright, up next, we've got one more tape we're going to take a look at. Alright, and we're going to come back into the realm of dungeon synth here. Dungeon synth and dark ambient. This is a special one. This is Magic Find, and I guess this is sort of the self-titled release from Magic Find. I don't know where this project originates from. I don't know who's behind it. Don't really want to know, because it would sort of ruin part of the mystique, so to speak. I know this is one of 3 releases for Magic Find, as far as I can tell. It looks like they had a release back in 2017, and then they have this self-titled release, and then it looks like they have a split as well. So this is a tape from Attic Shrines out of Georgia. If you'll remember, a couple episodes ago, we listened to another release from Attic Shrines in the background. We listened to a release called Filgia. But this one is, it's a strange one for sure. It's sort of a good example of what I love about Attic Shrines. Some of their releases, like this one, are just truly mysterious. Just a lot of strange, otherworldly art that they put out sometimes. If we open this up, we've got just a blank cassette. It looks like a sort of a new stock Maxwell cassette, 60 minutes, 30 minutes on both sides. No marking whatsoever from the production of this tape, just dubbed and put in this case. The J card is super interesting, so let's open that up. So on the front we have the name of the project, Magic Find, and then we've got what looks like 3 dragons, or some kind of creatures that look like dragons. On the inner fold we have the Attic Shrines logo, and then over here we have just some text that reads Ambient Dungeon Electronics. And this is all printed over something underneath that you can't really make out very well. But if we flip that over, you can actually see that this J card is made from a page torn from an old paperback book. It looks to be like some kind of biblical resource book. It's been highlighted. It's been annotated by a previous owner, and it's been torn out, printed, and then folded into a J card. I think I might have a couple of other releases that use this method as well, and that looks like a really cool way to make J cards to me. Apparently, it looks like that older style paperback, like the one I mentioned when we were looking at Phranick's book. It looks like that must be perfect size for just tearing out and folding into J cards. So that's just a really interesting idea to me, especially in the context of this tape. So as far as what's on this tape, let's take a look at some text that's on the Bandcamp page. So this is Shrine 009, the 9th release from Attic Shrines, and it came out in February of 2019. The Bandcamp page lists 2 editions of this tape. The first is and I'm quoting from the Bandcamp here, the reserved first press, cursed onto miscellaneous discarded cassettes and laid to rest beneath aged bookleaf J cards. And then the second release is described as second press, seared into cassettes by hand and interred within ragged and defiled page shroud. There's no mention of the number produced of either version, but there is one note underneath those notes that says, audio ripped from the first press, cassette number 3, side B. Side A contained unknown, miscellaneous, or no audio. So it seems that there was some kind of first run of old cassettes, and what we hear on this tape is just the actual music produced for the release, which only takes up one side. The other side here is blank, but it seems like originally there must have been leftover sounds from whatever old tapes were used on that first run. And I don't know if those first runs were even available to the public. Obviously what I have is a new tape, not an old tape, and my other side is totally blank. So I mean, I guess there was just, something random on that other side, depending on what tape was used at the time. It's not really important, I guess, and not to sound pretentious though, but there's something interesting to me there, because knowing that the original run had something on that side, that silence sort of becomes a part of the work, in my opinion. It even has a name on the Bandcamp page. Side A is referred to as the stifling of innumerable sounds and voices. And the way the Bandcamp is set up, it looks like that blank side is intended to be the A side of the cassette. So if you listen to this properly, if you listen to this tape properly, you're going to play the A side, which is totally blank. And then you're going to, wait about 30 minutes basically in silence, and then it's going to turn over and play the B side, which has the actual recorded audio. That's where the actual recording starts. So, that's just an interesting tidbit. I'm not saying you would have to listen to it that way, but it's an interesting way to interpret the way that was laid out. So as far as the actual recorded content is concerned, it's an unnamed piece that seems to be divided into several smaller parts. On the Discogs page, somebody has actually divided it into 9 parts, but I can only really identify 6 separate pieces here. So the whole thing is noisy, it's garbled, it's full of tape artifacts and distortion of one kind or another. It starts out with this spoken word sample, and there's several of these samples throughout, and I don't really know what they're from, or if they're even samples at all. Maybe it's recordings of the artist's voice, but to me it really sounds like it's been sampled from something. I'm just not sure what, but it's just this sort of haunting, uncanny voice and dialogue that crops up every so often. Then we have a piano and string passage with another spoken word part at the end, and there's something like sobbing underneath that. And then the second section that I kind of identify is made up of some long synth pad passages and this really menacing piano. Then there's another sample, that vocal sample, that leads into this just shrieking, distorted noisescape. And then after that, there's a couple more parts that are really the most disturbing for me, I think. What I think must be the 5th section, and again, my interpretation of the divides are probably a bit off, but what I think is the 5th section, it sounds just like sobbing, or like some kind of shuddering breath, or maybe even the sound of an insect rubbing its legs together. I can't really decide what it sounds like most. The idea that it's an insect noise is really interesting to me, and I'm going to ramble about H.P. Lovecraft here again for a second, as I'm wont to do on this show. But Lovecraft sometimes referred to the Necronomicon as having the original title of Al-Azif, which he defined as an Arabic word meaning the nocturnal sounds of insects in the desert, mistaken for the howls of demons. That is an embellished definition of the word, but the word as if does exist in some of the Arabic languages, and it means something like wind in the desert or whistling wind, or I've seen it defined as singing sand before. So that's just an interesting thing to me, is that, you know, is that some kind of insect sound we're hearing? I don't think that's really the intention of the artist who put it there, but that's what it brought to mind. And then this whole thing finishes with a distorted piano piece. And again, we've got a whole side of just blank material here, so depending on how you listen to it, you might end up with that blank side after you listen to that first, you know, whatever side you listen to first. But either way, you know, go listen to this. It's probably going to be really hard to get a copy of this on tape, because this stuff from Attic Shrines sells out really quickly, and this is long gone. But go to Bandcamp and check this out. This is a truly unsettling piece of dark ambient, and that's Magic Find from Attic Shrines in Georgia. All right, folks, well, that's our 6 tapes for this episode. I apologize. I think there's probably going to be a couple of cuts or some weird awkward jumps in this video. My camera seems to have cut out on me twice during the recording, but hopefully I was able to piece this together correctly. But I will see you guys next time for episode number 9, which I'm pretty excited about. That's going to be a cool episode, I assure you. But until then, remember, all cassettes are beautiful, and this is Nicholas Eidolon bidding you farewell.